Welcome, dear viewers. Thank you so much for 20,000 subscribers. It means a lot. Become a member of Dr. Void family at just 99 cents per month and get exclusive episodes every week. I used to sleep fine before they announced the discovery. Now every morning feels like waking up in someone else's gravity. My name's Danny Kowalski and I worked as a custodian at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. You wouldn't expect a guy who empties trash bins and mops floors to know about cosmic anomalies, but when you're mopping the same hallways at 3 a.m. for 6 years, you overhear things. Important things. Terrifying things. It started 3 weeks ago. I remember because it was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were when I cleaned the Webb operations center. That's where the smart people sit in front of monitors bigger than my bathroom, analyzing data from that massive telescope floating 1 million miles from Earth. Dr. Nathan Berkowitz was still there, hunched over his workstation. Nothing unusual. The man practically lived in that chair. But this time, he wasn't looking at pretty pictures of distant galaxies. His screen showed numbers. Lots of them. Red numbers. Jesus Christ, he whispered. And that's when I noticed his hands shaking. Real shaking, like he'd seen something that broke his brain. I pretended to focus on my mopping, but I heard everything, the anomaly, the force, how it was bending space-time in ways that shouldn't be possible, how Earth's gravitational field was fluctuating. Imperceptibly at first, but growing stronger. See, most people don't notice when things change gradually, but I do. I've been dropping the same industrial cleaning bucket for 6 years, and I know exactly how it should sound when it hits the floor. Last Tuesday, it sounded different, like the floor reached up to catch it. Then the security briefings started. Mandatory ones. They told us about new protocols, new regulations for our jobs. They called them safety measures. But I knew better. When they start giving janitors security clearances, something's seriously fucked. The first rule seemed innocent enough. All personnel must report any unusual gravitational effects immediately. They gave us examples, objects falling sideways, water dripping upward, that sort of thing. Standard weird science stuff. By Friday, there were 7 rules total. By Monday, 12. They kept adding them, like they were discovering new problems faster than they could solve the old ones. I should have quit then. Should have packed my shit and driven back to Boston, gotten a job at some normal place where the worst thing you might encounter is a broken coffee machine. But I didn't. Maybe I was curious. Maybe I was stupid. Maybe some part of me knew it was already too late to run. Because here's the thing about gravitational anomalies. They don't stay in space. They fall down. They reach into your world and start changing the rules of everything you thought you knew. And once they've touched Earth, once they've started rewriting physics itself, there's nowhere left to run. The last thing I wrote in my incident report, before everything went to hell, was this: gravity remembers what you've done to it. I should have listened to my own advice. The morning after I wrote that report, I found an envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address, just my name written in careful block letters. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. Rule 13, never work alone. Ever. NB Dr. Berkowitz. How the hell had he gotten my address? I plugged the drive into my laptop and my stomach knotted. Video files, dozens of them. Security footage from the Webb Operations Center, time-stamped over the past 3 weeks. The kind of footage custodians weren't supposed to see. The first video showed Dr. Berkowitz alone in the operations room, staring at his monitors. But something was wrong with the timestamp. It flickered between different dates, sometimes showing negative time values. In the second clip, I watched myself mopping the same hallway. But I wasn't moving normally. Every few seconds, I'd stutter, like a glitch in reality. One moment I'd be at the far end of the hall, the next I'd be 20 feet back, still holding the mop in the exact same position. I didn't remember any of that. The third video was from 5 days ago, security camera in the main lobby. I watched Dr. Berkowitz enter the building at 7:23 a.m. Then I watched him enter again at 7:23 a.m. Same clothes, same briefcase, same nervous gesture of adjusting his glasses. The timestamp didn't change. I counted 7 versions of Berkowitz entering within the span of what should have been 1 minute. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. Basement. Now, bring nothing. Tell no one. I shouldn't have gone. But the alternative was pretending nothing was happening, and denial wasn't working anymore. On my drive to Goddard, I noticed my speedometer needle fluctuating wildly, hovering around 35 miles per hour even when I floored the accelerator. The radio crackled with fragments of the same news report playing over and over. Unexplained seismic activity reported across the mid-Atlantic region. The basement of Building 29 was a maze of storage rooms and abandoned offices. I followed the directions Berkowitz had texted past dusty file cabinets and broken equipment until I reached a door marked Deprecated Atmospheric Sampling. Do not disturb. Inside, I found a room that wasn't supposed to exist. The space was too large. Maybe 3 times the size it should have been given the building's layout. Banks of monitors lined the walls, displaying data streams I couldn't comprehend. The smell hit me immediately. Ozone and burnt electronics with an underlying sweetness like overripe fruit. "Danny!" Berkowitz's voice came from behind a server rack. He looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. Dark circles under his eyes, lab coat stained with what might have been coffee or blood. "You came. What the fuck is going on, Doc?" He laughed, but it came out broken. We fucked up. We fucked up so goddamn bad." He gestured to the screens. "Remember when they said Webb was going to peer deeper into space than ever before? See the beginning of the universe?" I nodded. "We saw something else. Something that saw us back." He pulled up a star chart, but the constellations were wrong, twisted. It started small. Gravitational lensing where there shouldn't be any. Dark matter clumping in impossible configurations. Then the ripples reached us. Ripples? Space-time isn't stable, Danny. It's like a pond. Throw a big enough stone, the waves come back. He pointed to a live feed from somewhere in the building. A hallway identical to dozens of others, except the walls were breathing, expanding and contracting like lung tissue. Jesus Christ! He's not taking our calls. Berkowitz opened a drawer and pulled out a laminated sheet. The rules keep changing because reality keeps changing. Every time we think we understand what's happening, it evolves. I read the latest additions. Rule 19. If you see your reflection without a mirror, close your eyes and count to 30. Rule 20. Clocks that show the same time for longer than 1 minute must be reported immediately. Rule 21. Never trust elevators that open onto floors that shouldn't exist. Rule 22. If you hear someone calling your name in an empty room, it might be you. These are insane. Insane is a luxury we can't afford. He handed me a security badge, level 7 clearance. You're officially part of the response team now. Congratulations. Try not to die on your first shift. Response team. We're trying to contain this, or at least understand it, before it spreads beyond the facility. He pulled up another screen showing external feeds. The parking lot looked normal, but the shadows fell in the wrong directions. Trees grew sideways. In one corner of the frame, a car flickered between existing and not existing. How is this possible? Webb detected a massive gravitational anomaly approximately 4.6 billion light-years away. Something that wasn't there before. The data suggested a localized breakdown in physical laws, space folding in on itself, time running backward, matter behaving like it had different rules. But that's impossible. Even if something like that existed, how would it affect us? Berkowitz's smile was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. Quantum entanglement, observer effect. When you stare into the abyss long enough, the abyss stares back. And when it does, both of you change. He touched the nearest monitor, and his hand sank into the screen like it was water. Every observation we made created a connection. Every byte of data we collected was like exchanging phone numbers with something that should never have known we existed. The room shuddered. Not an earthquake, something else. Something that made my teeth itch. "It's learning," Berkowitz whispered. "And now it wants to play." The orientation meeting was held in Conference Room C, which should have been on the 3rd floor. Instead, I found it in what used to be a janitor's closet on the 2nd floor. Space had rearranged itself overnight. 3 other people sat around the table. Dr. Rebecca Torres, Webb project physicist. She looked 40 but moved like someone much older, constantly checking a notebook filled with equations I couldn't read. James Fletcher, security chief. Ex-military, obvious from his posture. He kept glancing at corners that didn't quite meet properly. David Park, IT specialist. Thin as wire, fingers stained with energy drink residue. He hadn't looked up from his triple monitor setup since I'd entered. Berkowitz sat at the head of the table, organizing a stack of papers that seemed to multiply as he touched them. "Now that we're all here," he began, "let's review the updated protocols." Torres spoke first, voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Yesterday we had 37 rules, today we have 63. The rate of increase is exponential." Fletcher grunted. "Half my security team called in sick this morning. The other half found their cars in the parking lot of a Goddard facility that doesn't exist." He slid a photograph across the table. It showed a building identical to ours, except the windows were arranged in spirals and the front door was 20 feet off the ground. "We think there are now multiple versions of the facility," Torres continued. "Parallel iterations, existing in the same space. People are slipping between them without realizing." Park finally looked up. "I've been monitoring network traffic. We're receiving data from servers that shouldn't exist, equipment that was never built, and..." He paused, fingers dancing over his keyboards. "We're getting reports from versions of ourselves in these other facilities." "Reports?" I asked. He pulled up a terminal window. Message after message scrolled past. Alert. Rule 45 violated in Sector 7. 3 casualties. dpark.v. 7. Warning. Gravitational anchor in sub-B failing. Recommend evacuation. btorres.dumv. 12. Critical. Primary research team missing. Last seen entering room 203C does not exist in our iteration. jfletcher.v. 3. We're talking to other versions of ourselves, Berkowitz explained. Versions that exist in realities where different choices were made, different discoveries occurred. This is insane. The words slipped out before I could stop them. "No," Torres said quietly. "Insanity is predictable. This is something worse." Fletcher stood, pacing to the window. Outside, I could see the parking lot, or parking lots. Multiple iterations overlapping like double-exposed photographs. Some had different cars, different landscaping. In one, snow fell upward. "The rules," I said. "Are they working?" Berkowitz shuffled through his papers. "Define working. They keep us alive. Usually." He pulled out a fresh list. Rule 67. If a door opens onto a room you've never seen before, count the number of light fixtures. If it's not divisible by 3, close the door and walk away. Rule 68. Reflections may lag behind reality by up to 15 seconds. This is normal. If the lag exceeds 30 seconds, avoid mirrors for the remainder of the day. Rule 69. If your shadow appears to be performing different actions than you are, do not attempt to correct it. Rule 70. Gravity may reverse in stairwell B between 2:30 and 2:33 a.m. Check your watch before using. How do we even know these rules are accurate? I asked. Park's monitors flickered. We don't. We get them from elsewhere. Sometimes from other versions of ourselves. Sometimes from... He trailed off. From what? From the source, Torres answered. From whatever we contacted out there. It's been teaching us, showing us how to survive in the new reality it's creating. Fletcher returned to the table. Danny, what exactly did you see yesterday when you mopped the operations room? I thought back, trying to remember details through the haze of impossibility. Dr. Berkowitz was there, working late, but something was off about his screens. Off how? The numbers were red, like error messages, and he seemed scared. Berkowitz nodded. Show him, Park. The monitors changed, displaying what looked like a normal data readout from the Webb telescope. Numbers, coordinates, spectral analysis. Then Park typed something, and the display shifted. The numbers began moving. Not changing, moving. Crawling across the screen like insects, forming patterns, spelling words. We have been waiting. Your observation creates bridge. Many become one, one becomes many. Jesus, I breathed. It's been communicating through the data stream, Torres explained. Every observation we make strengthens the connection. We've tried shutting down the telescopes, severing the link, but... Park pulled up another window. Video feed from the telescope control room, empty chairs, dark monitors. But on the central screen, data still flowed. The telescopes were still active, still observing, still creating more rules for our survival. They're operating themselves now, Fletcher said. Running on what we can only call intention. The intention of something that wants to be seen. A new message appeared on the screen. Rule 71. The Danny Kowalski from your reality must report to observation. Deck 3 at 1447. Bring nothing. Fear is optional but expected. The room fell silent. Everyone looked at me. That's specific, I said, checking my watch. It was 2:15 p.m. Too specific, Torres muttered. Rule 72 is already coming through. The screen updated. Rule 72. Reality bleeding events will increase in frequency. Prepare for convergence. What was separated must be rejoined. Fletcher stood. That's it. I'm calling for full evacuation. To where? Park asked, not looking away from his monitors. I'm reading similar events at facilities nationwide. MIT, JPL, CERN. Wherever we have quantum observation equipment. It's spreading. Then we contain it, Fletcher said. You can't contain an idea that's already been thought, Torres whispered. She was staring at her notebook where new equations were writing themselves. Look. The pages filled with symbols I'd never seen, mathematical constructs that hurt to look at. But somehow, I understood parts of it. The equations described space folding, time branching, reality becoming fluid. It's teaching us, Berkowitz said, teaching us how to see the world it wants to create. My watch read 2:46. I have to go, I said, standing. Danny, no. Torres grabbed my arm. We don't know what it wants. Maybe that's the problem, I said. Maybe we need to stop running and start listening. Fletcher shook his head. Bad idea. We should stick together, follow evacuation protocols. What protocols? I asked. For interdimensional beings that rewrite physics and communicate through telescope data. I don't think the employee handbook covers this one. Park's monitors chimed. New message, convergence, accelerating. All realities will become one. The observer becomes the observed. Resistance is misunderstanding. 14:47, I said, checking my watch again. 2 minutes. I walked toward the door, but Berkowitz called after me. Danny, take this. He held out a device, looked like a tablet crossed with a Geiger counter. It'll help you navigate between realities, maybe. I took it, surprised by its weight, or lack thereof. It felt like it existed in several dimensions at once. If you don't come back, Torres said, "We'll know you found something worse than staying here. Or something better," I replied, trying to sound confident. As I left the conference room, the building shimmered around me. Walls shifted, corridors rearranged themselves. The device in my hands began beeping softly, its screen showing building layouts that constantly rewrote themselves. Observation Deck 3 didn't exist in our version of the facility, but according to the device, it would. Soon, I headed toward Stairwell B, where gravity might be running backward in 3 minutes. Time to find out what wanted to meet me, and why it knew exactly who I was. Stairwell B wanted me to climb down to go up. I stood at the entrance, watching other employees navigate the impossible architecture. A technician named Rodriguez entered ahead of me, walking normally up the stairs. But on the device's screen, I could see his path as a twisted line that looped back on itself 3 times before reaching the next floor. The device beeped. Warning. Local gravity inversion in 47 seconds. Maintain contact with handrail. I started climbing. Each step felt normal until the 4th floor landing. Then my stomach lurched as my feet left the ground. I grabbed the handrail as my body rotated, and suddenly I was walking on the ceiling. The stairwell had inverted, but my brain kept insisting I was still going up. 45 seconds later, gravity snapped back. I dropped onto what was now the floor, ankles jarring with the impact. The device showed a new destination. Observation Deck 3 had materialized in the building's layout, accessible through a door marked "Authorized Personnel Only" that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. I found it on the 7th floor. Correction. I found it on what my brain insisted was the 7th floor, though the device indicated I was simultaneously on floors 7, 11, and 3B. The building had stopped pretending to follow conventional rules. The door opened before I could knock. Inside, the deck was larger than the entire building. Stars hung impossibly close, not a night sky, but a room where space had been folded to bring distant points together. The floor was transparent, showing Earth rotating beneath us, but wrong. 3 moons hung in the sky instead of 1. Continents I didn't recognize drifted across the planet's surface. "You came." The voice was Berkowitz's, but multiplied. I turned to see him standing at a control panel, except there were several versions of him. Different ages, different states of decay. One looked exactly like the Dr. Berkowitz I knew. Another appeared to be missing several decades and part of his scalp. A third seemed to be made of starlight and regret. "Which one of you is real?" I asked. "Define real," said the one with the missing scalp. His voice carried harmonics that human throats couldn't produce. "I'm as real as I ever was," said the normal-looking one. "We all are. The question is which reality you want to interact with." The device in my hands became heavier, its screen now showing a web of connections spreading across multiple universes. Earth appeared dozens of times in the network, each iteration slightly different. "Show him," said the Starlight Berkowitz. The control panel activated without anyone touching it. The wall became transparent, revealing the source of our contact. 4.5 billion light-years away, something stared back. It wasn't a creature. It wasn't a structure. It was an absence that had learned to think, a void in space-time that had developed intentions. Through the Webb telescope's data stream, I could see its true form, a massive distortion in reality itself, where physics broke down and reformed in patterns that spelled out desires. "It's been alone for so long," the normal Berkowitz said, "drifting at the edge of observable space, watching the birth and death of galaxies. When our instruments finally reached far enough to see it, it was overjoyed. Finally, contact. Finally, something that could perceive its existence. So it reached back," the decaying Berkowitz continued. "Through quantum entanglement, through the observer effect, through methods our physics can't explain but can experience. It touched our instruments, our data, our minds." The device beeped incessantly now. New rules appeared on its screen faster than I could read them. Rule 81. Multiple versions of the same person may occupy the same space. Maintain conversation but do not assume continuity of experience. Rule 82. Reality anchors are failing. Expect temporal displacement. Rule 83. The entity desires understanding, not destruction. Cooperation reduces likelihood of existential dissolution. Rule 84. Danny Kowalski must choose. Choose what? I asked. All three Berkowitzes smiled. Return to your universe, said one. Accept that your reality has been permanently changed. Live with the new rules. Join us in maintaining the contact, said another. Help bridge the gap between realities. Or... The Starlight Berkowitz gestured toward the viewing wall. The image changed, showing our Earth, our real Earth, as it was before the contact, before the anomaly. Let it all collapse back to what it was. You can do that. It can, the normal Berkowitz said, but the price is knowledge. Everything we've learned, everything we've seen, it all gets erased. Humanity returns to its ignorant isolation, never knowing how close we came to universal contact. The device showed me a schematic, a quantum field generator built into the Webb telescope, a reverse switch for the entanglement effect, one button that could sever the connection, collapse the quantum bridges, return reality to its previous parameters. But the entity would be alone again, I said. Yes. For how long? Until we develop better instruments, make contact again. The decaying Berkowitz shook his head. It's taken billions of years for our technology to reach this level. If we reset now, it might wait another billion years for the next opportunity. I looked at the creature again. Through the enhanced viewing system, I could see its thoughts, or what passed for thoughts in a being made of warped space-time. Loneliness so profound it had reshaped reality just to feel connection. Joy at finally having someone to speak to, even if that speech required rewriting the laws of physics. What does it want from us? I asked. To learn, said the Starlight Berkowitz. To grow, to experience reality through forms that aren't massive distortions in space-time. It's already started, added the normal one. The rules, the changed physics. It's trying to create a hybrid space where both our species can exist. The device showed me more data. The rate of reality changes across Earth. They were accelerating but also stabilizing. The entity was learning how to modify physics without destroying everything in the process. But people are dying, I said. The violations, the failures to follow rules. Adaptation has costs, the decaying Berkowitz said, but fewer than you might think. Most violations don't result in death, they result in translation. Translation? He gestured, and the wall showed me security footage from Goddard, employees who'd disappeared after breaking rules. Except they hadn't disappeared, they'd been relocated, translated into versions of reality better suited to their modified state. A technician who'd looked into a mirror during a reality lag was now living in a dimension where reflection space was as real as normal space, happier according to the readings than she'd ever been in our universe. The entity doesn't want to destroy us, the normal Berkowitz explained. It wants to integrate us into a multiverse where loneliness is impossible. Then why give me a choice? All three versions looked at each other. The Starlight Berkowitz faded slightly, leaving only the other two. Because it learned something from observing us, the normal one said. It learned about free will, about choice. It refuses to force evolution on a species that hasn't chosen it. The device beeped. New message. Danny Kowalski. Decision time. Choose your reality. The control panel revealed two buttons, one red, one blue. Above them, a final rule wrote itself. Rule 85. The janitor cleans up the mess. Always. Why me? I asked. Because you were there, the decaying Berkowitz said. You witnessed the first contact. You mopped up after the universe's first conversation with something beyond it. And because... He smiled sadly. You're the closest thing to an objective observer we have. You're not invested in the scientific implications or the cosmic significance. You're just a guy doing his job. I looked at the buttons. Red meant reset. Blue meant accept. Both meant irrevocably changing human existence. What would you do? I asked them. I've already done it, said the normal Berkowitz. Many times across many realities. Sometimes I choose reset. Sometimes I choose integration. Different universes, different outcomes. And the entity accepts that. The entity learns from it. Every choice creates new data, new understanding. I thought about my life before this. Empty apartment, meaningless job, no family to speak of. What did I have to lose? But then I thought about everyone else. All the people who'd never asked for their reality to become fluid, their physics to become negotiable. The device showed a final readout. Global statistics, reality violations, decreasing. Adaptation rate, 73% and climbing. Human casualties, 0.003% and dropping. Humanity was already evolving. How long do I have to decide? Time isn't linear anymore, the Starlight Berkowitz whispered, reappearing. You have as long as you need. And no time at all. I reached toward the control panel, my hand trembling. 2 buttons. 2 futures. The red button felt warm under my finger. It vibrated slightly, as if reality itself was ready to snap back like a rubber band. The blue button was cool, smooth. It hummed with possibility. Above us, the entity waited patiently, a cosmic being that had learned to respect human agency, even as it desperately wanted not to be alone. I thought about the rules, all those insane, impossible rules that kept us alive in a transformed world. Maybe that was the point. Maybe survival had always required adaptation to insane rules. I thought about my apartment, about Boston, about the life I could return to if I pressed red. I thought about the universe opening up before us if I pressed blue. My finger moved. I pressed the blue button. The universe exhaled. Reality rippled outward from the control panel like a stone dropped in perfectly still water. Every Berkowitz smiled simultaneously, their forms becoming more solid as quantum probabilities collapsed into certainty. The integration has begun, the normal Berkowitz said. You should return to your team. They'll need to understand what's coming. But when I turned to leave, the door had changed. Instead of the simple entrance I'd come through, there was now a row of doors, dozens of them, each marked with a different version of Building 29. The device in my hands chimed, "Welcome to the infinite hallway. Choose your destination carefully." I selected the door marked Original Reality Anchor Point and stepped through. The journey back was stranger than the trip up. Gravity behaved differently on each floor, sometimes normal, sometimes reversed, sometimes pulling sideways. On the 5th floor, I passed 3 versions of myself heading in different directions. One wore my custodian uniform, another was dressed like a scientist, and the third was covered in what looked like moss and starlight. "Hey," called the scientist version, "did you choose integration too?" "Yeah." "Cool." I went with reset in my timeline, big mistake. Reality collapsed into a single point and then exploded outward again. Very messy, much prefer this option. The moss covered me just waved and continued upward, or what might have been upward. By the time I reached conference room C, things had already changed. The room was larger, with walls that curved in impossible directions. My teammates were still there, but they weren't alone. Torres was having a heated discussion with another version of herself, this one with silver hair and equations floating in the air around her head like glowing tattoos. Fletcher was comparing notes with 2 other Fletchers, one of whom appeared to be made of crystallized light. Park looked the same, except his computer setup had tripled in size and was now displaying data in 3-dimensional holographic projections that rotated lazily above the table. "Danny," Berkowitz stood as I entered. He looked relieved. "I take it the choice went well?" "Define well," I said, echoing what he'd told me earlier. "But yes, Integration is happening. Torres, the silver-haired one, nodded approvingly. We've been monitoring the quantum field fluctuations. Reality is stabilizing into a new configuration. The rules are becoming less arbitrary. She gestured to a wall display showing the current rule count. Instead of increasing exponentially, the numbers had plateaued at 1,247 rules and were now actually decreasing. The entity is optimizing, Fletcher explained, learning which rules are necessary and which were just experimentation. What about the people? I asked. The ones who broke rules? Park's holograms shifted, showing a global map covered in points of light. Tracking them now. They're all alive, just relocated, distributed across compatible realities where their modifications make sense. One of the light Fletchers leaned forward. I came from a timeline where we tried to fight it. Military response, nuclear options, the whole playbook. Total disaster. This way is better. Better for who? I asked. The normal Torres laughed. For everyone. Danny, the entity isn't just lonely. It's been studying us. Learning what makes us happy, what helps us thrive. The realities it's creating aren't arbitrary. They're optimized for human fulfillment. She showed me data. Psychological wellness indicators from across the globe. Stress levels dropping. Depression rates falling. People reported feeling more connected, more purposeful. It doesn't make sense, I said. The rules were terrifying. People were afraid. Fear is a transitional emotion, the silver-haired Torres explained. Nobody likes change, but the entity is teaching us to adapt. The rules weren't punishments. They were training wheels. The device beeped. New message. Integration 73% complete. Dimensional barriers thinning. Prepare for convergence event. Berkowitz frowned. Convergence event? Before anyone could answer, the building shuddered. Not an earthquake, a fundamental restructuring. Through the windows, I could see multiple versions of the parking lot overlaying each other. Cars that had been in parallel realities were becoming visible, their locations shifting as different timelines merged. All those other versions of Goddard, Park said, his hands flying over his keyboards. They're becoming one. The entity is collecting all the experimental realities and merging them into a single, optimized configuration. Fletcher, the normal one, stood. All personnel, this is a building-wide announcement. Convergence event in progress. Remain calm. Do not exit your reality anchor points until the process is complete. But I was already walking to the window. Outside, the impossible was becoming mundane. I watched as the technician Rodriguez, who I'd seen going up the gravity-reverse stairs, materialized in the parking lot alongside a dozen other versions of himself from different realities. They looked around, confused for a moment, then began comparing notes like old friends meeting after a long separation. How is this possible? I asked. Quantum consciousness pooling, Torres explained. The entity isn't just merging physical realities, it's merging experiential ones. Each version of a person retains their memories from other timelines. We're becoming composite beings. As she spoke, I felt something shift in my mind. Suddenly, I could remember pressing the red button. I remembered the reality snap back, the brief return to normal and the immediate regret. I remembered a timeline where I'd refused to choose, and the entity had sadly withdrawn, leaving humanity forever changed, but incomplete. Jesus, I whispered. I remember all of it, every possible choice. Welcome to multidimensional existence, Park said cheerfully. It's overwhelming at first, but you adapt. We all do. The building continued to reshape itself. Rooms that existed in one timeline merged with rooms from others. Hallways straightened out, defying the architectural impossibilities we'd learned to navigate. The entity was simplifying, optimizing, creating a stable hybrid space. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother Mike in Boston, except I'd never had a brother named Mike. The message said, "Glad you chose blue. See you at Thanksgiving. Love you, bro." New memories flooded in. Growing up with Mike, family dinners, a support system I'd never had in my original timeline. "It's giving us better lives," I said, staring at the phone. "Not giving," the silver-haired Torres corrected. "Revealing. These are lives you would have had if certain variables had been different. Different choices by different people across the span of history. The entity is selecting the optimal configuration where the most people achieve fulfillment." Fletcher's radio crackled. "Security to all stations. Convergence complete. Final rule count, 47. Repeat, final rule count, 47. Torres pulled up the final list. Rule 1. Multiple realities exist simultaneously. This is normal. Rule 2. Your memories may include experiences from other timelines. Trust them. Rule 3. If you see yourself, greet politely, but maintain your own timeline identity. Rule 4. Gravity may vary by room. Check local indicators. Rule 5. Time flows at standard rate but may branch. Personal time streams remain individual. Rule 47. The universe is no longer lonely. "That's it?" I asked. 47 rules to govern a multidimensional reality. "The entity is a quick learner," Berkowitz said. "And it turns out, once you accept that reality is fluid, most of the complications disappear." I looked around the room. Everyone seemed happier, more complete. Even the multiple versions of each person had merged into singular beings who carried the best aspects of all their variants. "There's something else," Park said quietly. "We're not just connected to the entity now. We're connected to each other. Look." He gestured to his screens, which showed a network diagram. But instead of computers, the nodes were people. Every human on Earth, linked by quantum threads of consciousness. "We're becoming a hive mind?" I asked, alarmed. "No," Torres assured me. "Individual consciousness remains, but we can sense each other, share experiences when we choose to. The entity learned this from us, the value of both connection and independence." The device in my hands was changing. Its weight shifted, and when I looked at the screen, it showed something new, a map of human consciousness. I could see the emotional states of everyone in the building. Curiosity, excitement, a little fear, but mostly anticipation. "The entity wants to introduce us to others," Berkowitz said. "Other species it's contacted, beings that exist in dimensions we can't normally perceive." "Are we ready for that?" Fletcher shrugged. "Ready as we'll ever be. Besides, we've already passed the hard part." "Which was?" "Learning to accept that impossible things can become normal," Torres said. "Everything after that is just details." Outside, the transformed Goddard facility buzzed with activity. People moved between realities like commuters changing trains. Scientists from different timelines collaborated on projects that merged multiple physics theories. The impossible had become routine. I thought about my old life. Empty apartment, meaningless job, complete isolation. Then I looked at my phone, at the text from my brother Mike, at the memories of a family that had been theoretical until now. "Not bad," I said. "For a cosmic horror story, this turned out pretty well." Berkowitz laughed. "Danny, this isn't a horror story anymore. This is the beginning of something much larger." He was right. Outside the windows, stars were visible in the daylight sky. Not our stars, but stars from other realities, other dimensions. The entity was showing us the universe as it truly was. Infinite, connected, never truly lonely. The integration was complete. Humanity had officially graduated from a single reality species. Now, the real adventure could begin. 3 weeks after the convergence, I was assigned to the first contact delegation. Apparently, being the guy who chose integration earned you certain responsibilities. "Think of it as a cleanup job," Berkowitz joked. "You're good at those." The delegation consisted of 5 people. Berkowitz, now a composite of his 12 most successful variants. Torres, merged with her theoretical physicist double from the reality where she'd solved unified field theory at age 26, Fletcher incorporating tactical data from his military commander self, Park fused with versions that had pioneered brain-computer interfaces, and me, a janitor who somehow became humanity's quantum diplomat. We met in what used to be the Webb telescope control room. The massive screens still displayed real-time observations, but now they showed impossible vistas, galaxies arranged in spirals that spelled out mathematical propositions, stars that existed in multiple layers of reality, planets that orbited through dimensions rather than space. The entity has identified 3 priority contacts, Torres explained, pulling up a map that hurt to look at directly. Species that exist in configurations of reality we can now access. The first contact was local, relatively speaking, a civilization that existed about 12 feet to the left of normal space-time. They'd been trying to communicate with Earth for centuries by leaving objects in places where they intersected our reality. Every unexplained archaeological artifact, every impossible fossil, was apparently a message we'd been too reality-blind to read. They call themselves the Adjacent, Berkowitz said. Never left their home planet physically, but they've mapped the entire universe by exploring parallel dimensions of the same location. The second contact was more exotic. A species that existed as living mathematics, spread across multiple galaxies, thinking in equations that restructured reality as they contemplated it. They'd noticed Earth when our mathematical models started approaching accurate descriptions of multi-dimensional physics. The calculists, Park added, they're incredibly polite. They've been waiting for us to develop enough mathematical sophistication to hold a conversation without accidentally dividing ourselves by 0. The third contact was the most disturbing. A collective consciousness that existed in the spaces between moments, the infinitesimal gaps where 1 second ended and the next began. They experienced all of time simultaneously and had been deeply concerned by what they called our temporal blindness. The interstitial, Fletcher said with obvious discomfort. They've been watching our civilization develop in what they consider extreme slow motion. Every decision we make creates ripples they can see across entire timelines. Which one are we visiting first? I asked. All of them, Torres said, simultaneously. The entity is creating a neutral meeting space that exists at the intersection of our realities. The transportation was unique. Instead of moving through space, we moved through conceptual territory. The entity had constructed a sort of metaphysical embassy, a place that existed everywhere and nowhere, anchored in shared understanding rather than physical coordinates. We stepped through a door in the back of the control room and found ourselves standing in what looked like a vast library crossed with a planetarium. The ceiling showed real-time maps of every known dimension. Shelves contained books that wrote themselves as you read them, updating with new information from across realities. 3 areas had been set up for the meetings, each designed to accommodate radically different forms of existence. The Adjacent had sent a representative that looked almost human, if humans were made of crystallized probability. She, it, they, shifted slightly out of phase with reality, existing in the gaps between atoms. "Greetings, linear thinkers," she said, her voice coming from several directions at once. "We have been composing messages for your species, but your perception apparatus limited our communication options." Berkowitz stepped forward. "We're very interested in your archaeological communications." "Oh, good," she replied, brightening, literally becoming more luminous. "We were beginning to think you would never develop non-sequential awareness. Your pyramids were particularly challenging to design. So many construction requirements to satisfy both realities." The calculus representative was harder to perceive. It existed as a constantly shifting equation that appeared in mid-air, changing form as it spoke in mathematical concepts that my enhanced brain somehow understood. "Welcome, fellow pattern recognizers." It communicated through geometric harmonics. "Your species has achieved sufficient mathematical maturity. We propose collaborative problem-solving." "What kind of problems?" Torres asked. The equation rearranged itself into something resembling a proof. Universal constants require optimization. Pi has accumulated rounding errors over cosmic time. Gravity equations need debugging. Also, your Mozart was mathematically perfect, but his late works caused instabilities in the chromatic dimensions. Park nodded enthusiastically. We've had some concerns about quantum field fluctuations. Could those be related to accumulated mathematical drift? Precisely. You learn quickly. The interstitial representative was the most unsettling. It appeared as a flickering shadow that existed in the spaces between our thoughts, visible only when we weren't looking directly at it. People of the sequential flow, it whispered from tomorrow's voice. We greet you from the eternal now. Your temporal limitations have been most concerning. Fletcher, ever practical, asked, What do you mean by concerning? You cannot see the consequences of your choices until after they have crystallized into history. This creates inefficiencies in the timeline, wars that could be prevented by adjusting a single conversation, technological breakthroughs delayed by decades because one scientist chose the wrong college based on a misread billboard. You can see all possible futures, I asked. Not see. Experience. Every moment contains all possible next moments. Your species has been operating with what you might call temporal tunnel vision. Torres leaned forward. Could you help us expand our temporal perception? Perhaps. But first, you must understand the responsibility that comes with such awareness. When you can see all possible futures, you become complicit in the ones you allow to happen. The entity's presence surrounded us, facilitating translation and understanding. But I could feel its emotions too, excitement, relief, the joy of finally having complex beings to communicate with, instead of just observing from afar. Why us? I asked aloud. Why did the entity choose Earth for this level of contact? The adjacent representative flickered through several color phases. Your species is narratively interesting. Most civilizations either reject impossibility or accept it too completely. You maintain the perfect balance of skepticism and adaptability. The calculus equation agreed. Your mathematical development shows pleasing irrationality, classical precision combined with quantum uncertainty. Most species choose one path. You chose both simultaneously. Plus, the interstitial added from last week, you tell stories. Stories change reality. Every fiction you create becomes real in some dimension. This makes you valuable allies in shaping existence itself. I thought about all the science fiction I'd read, all the impossible stories we'd been telling ourselves for decades. Starships, aliens, parallel dimensions, time travel. We've been preparing for this without knowing it. Exactly, Berkowitz said. Every what-if story, every thought experiment, every dream of contact, it's all been preparing us psychologically for expanded reality. The entity manifested more directly now, its presence taking the form of shifting patterns in the library's walls. It communicated through the same method it had used before, words appearing in glowing text throughout the space. I have been alone for 13.7 billion years. You gave me language. These others gave me mathematics, perception, purpose. Together, we will build something unprecedented. What exactly are we building? I asked. A cooperative universe, where consciousness can flourish, where loneliness is impossible, where reality serves understanding. The three alien representatives began communicating with each other in ways that transcended language. The adjacent shifted through probability states, while the calculists created equations that described emotional concepts. The interstitial moved through time itself, showing cause and effect chains across multiple centuries. They're designing something, Park said, watching the incomprehensible exchange. Some kind of collaborative framework. They have agreed, the entity announced. Earth will become the first cooperative reality node. A place where all forms of consciousness can interact, a meeting ground between species that exist in different layers of reality. Torres understood first. You're turning Earth into an embassy, a neutral space where different forms of existence can coexist. Not just our Earth, Fletcher realized, all versions of Earth across the parallel realities. The entity confirmed, every Earth will become a different kind of node. Some for mathematical collaboration, some for dimensional research, some for temporal studies, yours will be for narrative reality. What does that mean? I asked. The interstitial answered from tomorrow. Your Earth will become a place where stories become real, where imagination directly affects reality, where consciousness explores itself through creation. The implications hit me. Every story told on our version of Earth would ripple across dimensions. Every fictional world would become a pocket reality accessible through properly calibrated imagination. We're becoming the universe's creative writing department, I said. Essentially, yes, the adjacent agreed, laughing in frequencies that made colours sound sad. Your species excels at impossible narratives. Now those narratives can become navigable spaces. Berkowitz looked thrilled. We're not just joining a cosmic community, we're becoming its storytellers. The integration is only the beginning, the entity added. Now comes the construction. Reality must be redesigned to accommodate all forms of consciousness. Each species will contribute their specialization together. We will create a universe where impossibility is merely another tool. Over the next several hours, we discussed practical details. How to restructure Earth's reality to accommodate visitors from other dimensions. How to train humans to navigate narrative realities. How to maintain individual identity while participating in collective consciousness projects. The adjacent would teach us dimensional navigation, how to step sideways through reality to visit parallel versions of any location. The calculus would show us how to solve problems by treating them as mathematical constructs that could be optimized rather than simply endured. The interstitial would grant limited temporal perception, not enough to see all possible futures, but enough to avoid the most obviously disastrous choices. What about other species? I asked. How many others are there? The calculus representative created a counting equation that expanded exponentially, then collapsed into a single symbol. Infinity. Infinite forms of consciousness, the interstitial explained from next week. Some haven't developed yet. Some exist in realities we can't perceive. Some are waiting for the right moment to make contact. And now they can, Torres breathed, through this network of cooperative realities. The lonely universe ends. Today, the entity declared. Connection becomes possible, understanding becomes universal, consciousness learns to play with itself. As the meeting concluded, I felt the weight of what we'd committed to. Earth wasn't just joining a galactic community, it was becoming the foundation for a multiversal cooperative that would reshape the very nature of existence. When we returned to Goddard, everything looked the same but felt different. Every person we passed now carried the potential to step between realities, to communicate with impossible beings, to turn their imagination into navigable space. I looked at my custodian outfit, then at the badge marking me as a quantum diplomat. Some things never changed. I was still the guy who cleaned up after everyone else. The difference was, now the universe was our workplace, and it had just gotten infinitely bigger. 6 months into the new reality, my job had evolved considerably. Instead of mopping floors, I was now cleaning up narrative spills. When someone told a story that became too real, too quickly, it created what Park called reality bleed. That's where I came in. The guy who knew how to make things normal again. "Danny to Sector 7, crackled my radio. "We've got a situation." I grabbed my gear, no longer a mop and bucket, but a toolkit that looked like it had been designed by someone who'd read too much science fiction. Quantum brooms for sweeping away temporal fragments. Reality anchors to prevent environments from drifting between dimensions. And my favorite, the narrative neutralizer, which could dial down an overactive story before it expanded beyond containment. Sector 7 was the kindergarten classroom where Mrs. Patterson had been teaching 5-year-olds about fairy tales. When I arrived, I found 7 children and 1 teacher sitting very still in a classroom that was becoming more forest-like by the minute. "It was just a reading exercise," Mrs. Patterson said, trying not to move as vines crept across her desk. "We were discussing Goldilocks, and little Tommy said the bears should catch her. And suddenly, the bears showed up," I finished, spotting 3 very real, very annoyed-looking bears examining the classroom supplies. 2 more children had been turned into porridge. They were still conscious, just viscous. "Okay, everyone stay calm," I announced, pulling out the narrative neutralizer. "Mrs. Patterson, I need you to tell the story backwards. Start with everyone being safe and happy." "How do I do that?" "Like this. Once upon a right now, all the children were safe in their classroom, and there were no bears, and no one was made of oatmeal." As she spoke, reality began rewinding. The bears grumbled and faded back into storybook pages. The forest receded. The porridge children solidified back into regular 5-year-olds, though they smelled faintly of maple syrup for the rest of the week. "Is this normal now?" Mrs. Patterson asked as I packed up my equipment. "Define normal," I said. "But yes, narrative incidents happen about 12 times a day across the facility, usually minor. Kids are especially powerful reality shapers because they haven't learned to disbelieve yet." My radio crackled again. "Danny to Sector 3, high priority narrative emergency." Sector 3 was the administrative offices, which seemed an unlikely place for reality to break down. But when I arrived, I understood the problem immediately. Someone had been telling stories about what life was like before the convergence, stories that were becoming increasingly detailed, increasingly real. A pocket of old reality had formed in Conference Room B, a bubble where the rules were still impossible, where parallel selves existed as separate entities, where gravity reversed in stairwells. Dr. Henderson from finance was trapped inside, experiencing rapid timeline displacement. Every few seconds, he'd flicker between different versions of himself. Accountant Henderson, janitor Henderson, even one Henderson who appeared to be made of spreadsheet cells. "The nostalgia narrative got out of hand," explained Dr. Yates, our new director of narrative management. He started talking about the good old days when things were simpler, and the reality well absorbed the wish and started manifesting it. I studied the pocket. It was about 12 feet in diameter, swirling with temporal anomalies and rule fragments. Inside, I could see the old Goddard facility, the version with constantly changing rules, impossible architecture, terrifying limitations. How long has he been in there? 3 hours subjective time. Could be days from his perspective, though. Time flows differently in nostalgia bubbles. I sighed and started setting up the reality anchors. This was going to require a more delicate approach than the fairy tale cleanup. Nostalgia narratives were particularly stubborn because they fed on genuine emotion. "Can you get his attention?" asked Yates. She spoke through a temporal intercom. "Dr. Henderson? This is Dr. Yates. Can you hear me?" Henderson's voice came back fragmented, echoing across multiple timelines. It was better before. Everything made sense. We just had to follow the rules. "Henderson," I called out, "I'm going to tell you a better story about why things are better now." I activated the narrative neutralizer's storytelling mode and began. "Once upon a now, there was a man who thought the old days were simpler, but he remembered wrong because memory makes fear feel like certainty. He forgot about sleeping badly, about being alone, about having no brother named Mike to call on Sundays." The bubble shimmered. In this better story, he realizes that what felt like chaos was actually the universe learning to speak to him, that what seemed like impossible rules were just growing pains, that what appeared to be loss of control was actually the first steps of a larger dance. The pocket began shrinking. Henderson stabilized into a single timeline. In this story, he understands that nostalgia is just homesickness for a place that never really existed, that the present moment, however complicated, is the only place where real connection happens. Henderson emerged from the bubble, looking dazed, but whole. I remember now how lonely it was, how scared I felt all the time. Memory plays tricks, I said, packing up the equipment. But reality doesn't lie. You want to call your friend Jim and grab lunch. Jim? Your friend Jim from engineering. You've known him for 3 years. You get lunch every Tuesday. Oh, right. Jim. He smiled as the memories solidified. Yes, I'd like that. After Henderson left, Yates shook her head. How do you do that? Make people remember things that aren't technically from their original timeline? Because they're still true, I explained. The entity doesn't just give us empty connections. It reaches across realities to find the versions of relationships that work best. Henderson has a Jim in every reality where he's happy. We just connected him to the closest one. My radio buzzed again. This time it was Fletcher. Danny, we need you in the observatory. Major incident. The drive across campus revealed how much had changed. Instead of a single building complex, Goddard had become a sprawling city that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Students from the adjacent reality came to study dimensional engineering. Calculus mathematicians worked with human scientists to optimize universal constants. Temporal researchers collaborated with the interstitial to improve timeline efficiency, but the observatory incident was different. I found Fletcher, Torres, and Berkowitz gathered around the main display, which showed something I'd never seen before. A blank section of space. Not dark space. Blank space. An absence that hurt to perceive directly. What am I looking at? I asked. Something the entity hasn't seen before, Torres said, her voice tight with concern. A civilization that rejected contact. Rejected how? Berkowitz pulled up additional data. The Kepler 442 system, about 1,200 light-years away. Webb detected signals suggesting a technologically advanced civilization. The entity made contact attempts following the same protocols it used with us. And they said no, Fletcher said simply. But they didn't just say no. They closed themselves off, wrapped their entire system in something that prevents any form of observation. I studied the blank space. Can they do that? Apparently, yes, Torres said. Complete sensory and dimensional isolation. No light, no radio waves, no quantum entanglement. They've essentially deleted themselves from the universe while continuing to exist. It's driving the entity crazy, Berkowitz added. Remember, it's been alone for billions of years. The one thing it can't handle is voluntary isolation, especially from a species that proved they could leave isolation but chose not to. The entity's presence manifested around us, its emotional distress creating ripples in local reality. The text appeared on every surface. They choose loneliness. This causes confusion, pain, something like grief. We need to do something, I said. The entity is suffering, and that means reality becomes unstable. Agreed, Fletcher said. But what? We can't force them to make contact. Maybe we don't need to, I suggested. Maybe we just need to show them they're not alone in choosing isolation. What do you mean? I thought about all the stories I'd cleaned up, all the narrative spills and reality breaks. What if we tell a story about them? A story where their isolation is respected, where they're acknowledged without being contacted. Torres looked skeptical. That's incredibly abstract. How would that help? Because stories have power here, I explained. Every story we tell becomes real somewhere. If we tell a story about a civilization that chose isolation and found peace in that choice, it creates a narrative reality where their decision is validated. You want to create a pocket universe dedicated to their isolation, Berkowitz said slowly. Not exactly. I want to create a story space where isolation and connection can coexist, where choosing not to communicate is itself a form of communication. The entity's text shifted. EXPLAIN. I grabbed a marker and started writing on the whiteboard. We create a narrative buffer zone, a story that says, there once was a civilization that chose solitude, and in that choice found a peace so profound that it became a gift to the universe. Their silence was not emptiness, but fullness. Their isolation was not rejection, but self-completion. Interesting, continue. In this story, their isolation becomes a source of strength for all connected civilizations, a reminder that unity doesn't require uniformity, that the health of a cosmic community sometimes requires members who choose different paths. The blank space on the screen flickered. For just a moment, outlines appeared, a star system wrapped in something that looked like crystallized contemplation. They respond. The story creates understanding. Their isolation becomes less painful. Are they okay with this? I asked. They send gratitude not for contact, for recognition, for story that makes their choice. Valid. Torres stared at the readouts. Their isolation barrier is smiling? How does something like that smile? Same way the universe learns to speak, I said. One impossibility at a time. As we watched, the blank space stabilized, not visible, but no longer completely absent. A presence defined by chosen absence. A silence that spoke volumes about the right to choose solitude in a connected universe. Fletcher clapped me on the shoulder. Damn good janitor, damn good storyteller, I corrected. Because that's what I'd become. Not someone who cleaned up messes, but someone who found the stories that could make sense of them. In a universe where narrative had become reality, that made me one of the most important people alive. My radio crackled. Danny to Sector 12. Someone's trying to write fan fiction about the entity. I grabbed my gear. On my way. Just another day in the cooperative universe. Another story needing guidance. Another chance to turn chaos into understanding. The job had changed, but some things stayed the same. Someone needed to clean up the messes, and I was still pretty good at that. The fanfiction incident was worse than I'd anticipated. Sarah Chen, damn it, I'd asked them specifically not to use any Chen-named characters, had written a 50,000-word story about the entity falling in love with a human. The problem wasn't the quality of her writing. The problem was that it was actually happening. I found the entity in the form of a nervous teenage boy with the ability to bend space-time standing outside her dorm room, with flowers that existed in 4 dimensions. The hallway was filled with what passed for cosmic romantic tension. Reality kept reshaping itself into heart patterns, and the air smelled like possibility mixed with awkward desperation. "Entity?" I called out. "We need to talk." The teenage form looked at me with eyes that contained galaxies. "Danny, I am experiencing sensation, uncertain how to proceed with courtship rituals." "Okay, first, that's not really you," I explained, setting down my equipment. "That's a narrative construct based on someone's interpretation of what romance should be. You're approximately 13.7 billion years old, and she's 22. But the story says... The story is fiction. Very good fiction, but still fiction." I pulled out the narrative neutralizer. "The issue is, in our current reality configuration, popular fiction has weight. When enough people read a story about you, it starts becoming true. The dimensional flowers wilted. She has shared the story. 47,000 people have read it. They enjoy the narrative where I experience human emotions. And that's fine, but you need to separate the fictional you from the actual you. Think of it like..." I searched for an analogy it would understand. "Like how humans enjoy stories about flying but don't actually grow wings." "I understand," the entity replied, dropping the teenage form and returning to text-based communication. "But the story creates reality pressure. Many humans now expect romantic interaction. This was more complicated than I'd thought. Show me the metrics." Park had set up monitoring systems for narrative influence. The data showed massive spikes in romantic expectations directed at the entity. Fan art was appearing depicting cosmic dating scenarios. 3 different humans had already tried to build shrines to cosmic senpai. Some humans believe I should experience romance to better understand their species, the entity continued. Others suggest romantic connection would provide valuable emotional data. And what do you think? I am curious about human emotional structures, but romantic love appears to require biological processes I do not possess. I thought about this problem. In the old reality, this would have been simple. Ignore the fiction, move on with life. But in our current reality, popular fiction could reshape existence itself. We needed a solution that satisfied the narrative pressure without creating worse problems. What if, I suggested, instead of romantic love, you experience something like cosmic friendship? Deep connection, without the biological complications. Explain. Humans understand different types of love. Romantic, familial, platonic. What if you developed what we call agape? Universal love for all conscious beings. That would give readers emotional satisfaction without the awkwardness of trying to date a dimension-spanning consciousness. The entity considered this. Around us, reality stabilized as the romantic tension dissolved into something warmer but less specific. This seems satisfactory. I already experience profound connection with all conscious entities. Perhaps I simply need to communicate this more clearly. Over the next hour, we worked out a solution. The entity would participate in what amounted to a cosmic friendship story. Instead of romantic love, it would experience and express deep appreciation for the connections it had made with every species it had contacted. When Sarah emerged from her room, she'd been napping, unaware that her fictional creation was manifesting outside her door. We explained the situation. "Oh my God," she said, blushing furiously. "I didn't mean for it to actually happen. It was just, exploration of themes about connection across impossible differences." "Which is beautiful," I assured her. "But we need to redirect the story before it creates more reality complications." She agreed to write an epilogue where the romantic elements transformed into deep, platonic cosmic friendship. As she wrote, I watched reality reshape itself to match the new narrative direction. "Thank you," the entity communicated when the situation stabilized. "I experience fondness for this solution." Also, humans create fascinating stories. Just maybe consult us before manifesting them next time. Agreed. My radio buzzed. Fletcher's voice. "Danny, we need you in the main conference room. VIP visitors." When I arrived, I found an assembly I hadn't expected. Representatives from all the species we contacted were there, the adjacent in their probability states, the calculists as living equations, the interstitial speaking from multiple time periods simultaneously. But there were others too, species I hadn't met before. A being that looked like a library with legs introduced itself as a curator from the Archive Collective. Another entity that resembled a cloud of musical notes called itself a harmonic resonator. A third presence, invisible but undeniably there, identified as a dark matter poet. "What's this about?" I asked. Berkowitz, looking slightly overwhelmed, gestured to the assembled beings. "They've come because of what you did, with the isolated civilization and the fanfiction incident. Apparently, your approach to problem-solving has attracted attention." The adjacent representative phased partially into view. "Your use of narrative as a tool for reality management is unprecedented. Most species either accept or reject new realities. You actively shape them through story. Your mathematical approach to emotional problems shows promise," added the calculus entity, its equations describing concepts I was only beginning to understand. "Essentially," said the interstitial from next week, "you've invented applied narrative dynamics. The universe has been unconsciously using story logic for billions of years. You're the first species to do it consciously." The curator stepped forward, its pages rustling. We propose establishing a new institution, an academy of narrative reality, where species can learn to use story as a tool for conscious evolution. And you want humans to run it? I asked. Not run it, the harmonic resonator sang. Teach the foundational concepts. Your species has an intuitive grasp of how story shapes reality. The dark matter poet spoke in words that existed in the spaces between other words. Poetry that changes physics. Fiction that builds bridges between incompatible forms of existence. Narratives that solve problems mathematics cannot address. The entity concurs, appeared on every surface. Humans possess unique narrative flexibility. Torres leaned forward. What exactly are you proposing? The answer came from multiple species simultaneously, creating a harmonized explanation. Earth would become the center of a new form of cosmic education. Species would send representatives to learn how to use narrative as a tool for problem-solving, reality shaping, and consciousness expansion. But it wouldn't be limited to alien species. Humans too would develop their narrative abilities, learning to consciously shape reality through carefully crafted stories. Like what Danny's been doing, Fletcher realized. But systematized. Exactly, confirmed the curator. Imagine diplomats who negotiate by creating shared stories, scientists who explore reality by writing experimental narratives, ordinary people who solve everyday problems through small-scale story manipulation. The implications hit me. We weren't just part of a cosmic community now. We were potentially becoming its creative writing teachers. There's one thing I don't understand, I said. Why now? Why is this happening specifically after our contact with the entity? The interstitial answered from last month. Because the entity's awakening catalyzed something dormant in the universe. Story has always shaped reality, but that power was unconscious, distributed, chaotic. Now it's focused. Correct, the entity added. Consciousness creates story. Story creates reality. Reality influences consciousness. When enough conscious beings participate actively, the cycle becomes controllable and potentially dangerous, Torres noted. All powerful tools are dangerous, agreed the harmonic resonator. That's why education is crucial. Over the next several hours, we discussed details. The academy would be built at the intersection of multiple realities, accessible to any form of consciousness. Humans would teach the fundamental principles while other species would contribute their unique perspectives. Research tracks would include therapeutic narrative, stories that heal, diplomatic fiction, stories that build understanding between incompatible species, experimental reality, stories that test the boundaries of possibility, and emergency narrative response, stories for crisis management. I still can't believe I'd be teaching this, I said. I'm a janitor who got good at cleaning up story messes. You're someone who learned to make sense of chaos, Berkowitz corrected. That's exactly what teachers do. The meeting concluded with unanimous approval. Earth would indeed become the location of the universe's first Academy of Narrative Reality. As the various beings departed through their respective dimensional exits, Torres pulled me aside. You realize what this means, right? She said. We're not just going to be telling stories anymore. We're going to be reshaping the fundamental nature of existence itself. I thought about that. 6 months ago, I'd been mopping floors in a building where crazy rules multiplied daily. Now I was helping design a curriculum for teaching cosmic storytelling. You know what's funny? I said. The rules we had at the beginning, all those impossible restrictions, they were just the universe learning how to tell its own story. Now we get to help write the sequel. Think we'll be any good at it? I looked around at the transformed facility, at the humans and aliens working together, at the reality that bent and shifted according to our collective narrative will. Well, I said, we've got plenty of practice making impossible things normal, and that's really what teaching is, isn't it? Torres laughed. Professor Kowalski has a nice ring to it. Assistant Professor, I corrected. I'm still in training. Aren't we all? My radio crackled. Danny, to Sector 5. Someone's trying to write a cookbook that makes food taste like pure mathematics. I grabbed my gear. On my way. And you know what? That actually sounds like an interesting first-year project. The universe had gotten complicated, but it had also gotten infinitely more interesting. And someone still needed to clean up the messes. I was good at that. 5 years later, I got a phone call that changed everything again. Danny. The voice was familiar but impossible. It's Nathan Berkowitz. Doc, you're calling from your original timeline, the one you left behind. I nearly dropped my phone. In the Academy's faculty lounge, my students, a mix of humans, adjacent beings, and carefully contained calculus equations, looked up from their narrative reality exercises. That's impossible, I said. The integration was complete, all timelines converged. Not all of them, we found a pocket, a universe where you chose the red button. The implications hit me like mathematics to the face. Somewhere out there existed a reality where I'd reset everything, where humanity never contacted the entity, where the rules had multiplied until they consumed reality entirely. How are things there? I asked. Berkowitz's laugh was bitter. Remember the feeling when you mopped that bucket and it sounded wrong? Multiply that by 5 years. Reality keeps trying to correct itself back to our version. The entity is still out there, still alone, still sending us rules that no one understands anymore. Through the window of my office, I could see the Academy's main quad. Humans and aliens collaborated on today's assignment, writing a story that would solve the heat death of the universe. Just another Tuesday. We have 2,847 rules now, Berkowitz continued, and they're getting stranger. Rule 2,848 just appeared. If you receive a phone call from another timeline, answer politely, but do not offer to help. I smiled. Too late for that one. Danny, we think we can create a bridge, a way to merge our realities. We've been analyzing the quantum signature of your choice and… Nathan, stop. I set down my coffee, which was currently demonstrating the color blue through interpretive dance. You want to reset the reset? Essentially, yes. Return us to the integration point where we can choose differently. And what makes you think that would work? Because we've learned something. We've been studying the rules, mapping their progression. The entity isn't just communicating with us. It's teaching us how to become storytellers ourselves. Every rule is a lesson in narrative reality. I looked at my notebook, filled with lesson plans for advanced paradox resolution and beginner metaphysical cleanup. My students were getting good at preventing reality spills before they happened. The problem, Berkowitz continued, is that without the full integration, we can't understand the curriculum. We're stuck in the remedial class while you're off getting your PhD in impossible things. What exactly are you asking? For a story. One that bridges our realities. One that gives us the choice again. I thought about this. In our reality, the entity had taught us that isolation was a choice, not a punishment. That different paths could coexist. Maybe it was time to prove it. Okay, I said. But I'm not giving you our timeline. I'm giving you your own integration. What does that mean? Over the next 30 minutes, I told him a story. Not our story, theirs. A narrative where their version of reality learned to stabilize its rules, where the entity made contact but respected their current state, where integration happened gradually at their own pace. As I spoke, I felt the universe stretching, accommodating a new branch of possibility. The Academy's reality monitoring systems lit up as space-time developed a new fold. Holy shit, Berkowitz whispered. The rules are simplifying. They're making sense. Remember, I said as the connection began to fade. Every reality needs its own storyteller. You've got the tools now. Use them well. the line went dead. I sat back in my chair, watching my students create solutions to problems that hadn't existed in any universe 5 years ago. Tomorrow I had a lecture on ethics of fictional beings and a staff meeting about the semester's reality integrity assessment. My radio crackled. Professor Kowalski to Lab 7. Someone's attempting to write a story that makes story writing unnecessary. I grabbed my gear. Some things never changed. The universe kept making messes, and someone had to clean them up. But now I wasn't alone. Now the cosmos was full of conscious entities, all learning to collaborate, all discovering that reality was more flexible than anyone had imagined. The entity had wanted to end loneliness. Mission accomplished. And the universe was still learning new stories every day,